Welcome, welcome. I don't know. No. Okay, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. Okay, just waiting for a few other people to join us here in person. So just give us about 1 minute and we'll get started. Thank you. Okay, well, let us get started. Greetings, everyone, from the Buildings Pavilion in the Blue Zone at COP26. And welcome to our session on decarbonizing the built environment. How is your sustainability strategy measuring up? I'm Cynthia Curtis, and I'm responsible for sustainability stakeholder engagement at JLL. And I'm joined here by some esteemed colleagues, and we're going to have really looking forward to an interactive and engaging dialogue on how we can decarbonize the built sector. As we know, we don't get to net zero without buildings. But before we get started, I'd like to hand it off to Guy Granger, who leads JLL's Sustainability Services and ESG, to set the stage. Guy?
Thank you very much, Cynthia, and welcome everybody. Yeah, you're going to be hearing about some research we did earlier in this year, because we've noticed it's brilliant to see so many businesses setting targets and strategies around environmental or social goals. But one thing that came out of our dialogue and our research and our engagement with businesses all over the world is that actually there are very few action plans in place around decarbonizing real estate portfolios, whether they're being occupied by these businesses, where they're being owned by these businesses, or even being lent or insured on by these businesses. So we started asking the question, why is that? If this decade is supposed to be the tipping point, then why aren't there more action plans in place? And we're going to be talking about some of that today. Now, I've been here in Glasgow at COP since Monday, and I'm really pleased to say that I'm picking up a real shift, and it's a systematic shift. And that's because it's noticeable that the language here is that the target setting is behind us. And now it's all around transition plans and setting those transition plans for as much action this decade as possible. And so what we will see as a result, and I think yesterday Finance Day demonstrated this, is that access to capital, to debt, and actually liquidity of real estate assets will become tougher with every year that goes by, unless you've got these transition plans not only in place, but being activated. We're seeing this as a business ourselves. We've managed 5 billion square feet globally, which is a big, big footprint when it comes to Scope 3. And we've recently been recognized as setting a net zero standard for our target, science-based target, now recognized by the SBTi. What comes with that actually is a pathway during this decade, a near-term reduction during this decade to reduce our carbon emissions by over 50%. So we have got a very real job to do, and we've got to do it soon. So without further ado, I think I'll hand back to Cynthia to hear about this research, and more particularly to see what can be done to speed up this transition to a built environment with zero impact, or let's dream, a built environment possibly with a positive impact. Back to you, Cynthia.
Great. Thank you so much, Guy. I also want to, we have some folks here in the room who we hope will be joining our conversation, but we'd also like to invite you who are listening online. You can join us using the hashtag Buildings Pavilion, and you can tag myself, Cynthia Curtis, or JLL, or join Global ABC. And you can send your questions that way, and we'll engage through online conversations as well. So I'd like to first introduce my colleague joining here, Ibrahim Al-Zubi. And Ibrahim is the Chief Sustainability Officer for MAF. He's also the chair of the World Green Building Council's Corporate Advisory Board. And he leads a myriad of other things, seemingly endless things that he's responsible for throughout the Global South. I'd also like to introduce Lori Mombardi. She's our Senior Vice President for ESG Research. She's based in Boston and is beaming in from Boston today. And Jeremy Kelly, who leads our research on global cities, and Jeremy is based in London. And we'll start off with Lori and Jeremy, who will walk us through the research that Guy referenced and take us through some of the key findings, and then open it up for some dialogue and some Q&A. So Jeremy, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that introduction. I wonder if we could take it to the first slide, please.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So let's kick off and share with you the results of our survey. I think to just kick off, as the real estate industry is pivoting towards finding solutions and taking action to dealing with the climate emergency and social fractures, then JLL has established a responsible real estate framework, which you can see here. And it's in order to hone attention of the role of the built environment that it plays in regenerating the environment and creating prosperous and healthy places and communities. And so this is our take on defining responsibility through the real estate lens that identifies 6 components. And it's the eco-healing component that we are focusing on today, the role that buildings are playing in reversing climate change and decarbonization. But I guess it almost goes without saying that these six segments are hugely interlinked, and worth emphasizing that in the pursuit of decarbonization, we cannot and realistically achieve that without addressing the human and social impacts. And so if we could move to the next slide, to just explain the survey. The first phase of the survey has been to look at eco-healing, to understand where businesses are in their journey to decarbonisation as it pertains to buildings. And so we conducted an online survey of nearly 650 respondents to test attitudes and commitments and goals and actions and drivers, as well as barriers and challenges. And so this data set covers both the investor, developer, landlords as the providers, and the occupiers as the end users. So if we go to the next slide, the richness of the data has enabled us to assess the maturity levels of the respondents. And so if we go to the next slide, please. There we go. We found that 20% of the organizations that we canvassed were classified as leading. They're the ones that are setting the pace. They're the models for others to follow. And they're the ones with comprehensive and integrated sustainability strategies and roadmaps. But actually 80% are earlier on in their journey. They're either on the path that companies are actually kind of on the cusp of taking strategic approach, or starting out, companies that are actually not doing very much at the moment, but anything they are doing is on an ad hoc basis. And so by segmenting the respondents in these ways, we've been able to dissect the nuances of the different groups and their journeys to sustainability. So let me segue to Laurie in Boston to take you through some of the detailed findings. Laurie.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. On my side, I was looking at the next slide, so I just wanted to make sure that the audience, if we can go up 2 slides, please, back up 2 slides, please. I just wanted to make sure that the audience was looking at the slide that Jeremy was speaking to. And on my side here in Boston, it was moved to the next one. But I think this is a very important point, that 20% are leading, and then the other 80% are on the path or starting out on their journey to decarbonization of all of our respondents. So with that, I'm going to start my section. I hope that's in line with where the slides are at right now. You can go back. Thank you. Let's stop here for a moment. Okay, so to kick off, really one of the big findings, which was very encouraging in this survey, which was done in June of this year, was how much, no matter where you are on your life cycle as an investor or an occupier on the decarbonization journey, you understand that climate risk is financial risk. Understanding that that mantra has gone mainstream was really an encouraging finding for us. I think COP26 right now confirms that and the energy on the ground there. But it was really nice that it came through in the data. The actions on the next slide, we really explored the motivations for action, and we grouped them in a few different ways. So on the bottom, you can see that there are financial reasons why you might be motivated as an investor or as an occupier, of course. There's branding, and then there's stakeholder. And actually, regulatory was one of the ones that we had asked. It did not come up in the top 5 yet on a global scale. On a global scale, the reasons and the motivation around why you set off on setting your ESG goals and moving along that journey is really about stakeholder management. Companies are feeling the pressure from people, from employees, from clients, from their customers. That is a real thing. And on the occupier side, that desire to meet society's expectations is moving and creating bold commitments and action. One of the pieces that came up for us in the data that was really also encouraging is how much both sides, the investors and the occupiers, both really put a high priority on improving the operational efficiency of their real estate and decreasing the costs. Now, we know that these two groups have had difficulties and have difficulties. You know, when you look at whether you have a gross lease where the owner is really paying for all the utilities, the owner may not always be able to motivate the behaviors of the tenants. In a triple net lease, you might find that the actual occupiers are motivated to use less energy, but the investors don't want to put the capital expense into the upgrades that will make the building more efficient. We feel that with this North Star of net zero carbon, the fact that companies are setting commitments, that this is an opportunity to work together, an opportunity to co-create that greener outcome, to work through the difficulties, because both of them have to achieve this North Star. So we view that as a really nice signal. I'm going to move to the next slide, please. I want to talk about some of the barriers. They are real and they are big, but they are not insurmountable. We know that for both sides, our investors and our occupiers felt that COVID created headwinds and created competing priorities. We know that that was real and it bubbled up in the data. We also see that data and technology infrastructure pops up as a key barrier for both sides. We've heard the mantra, and I'm sure you've heard it a couple of times on the ground at COP, that you can't manage what you can't measure. And that is true in the built environment. And we encourage at JLL, we encourage our stakeholders to get a great handle on building performance, to put in the technology infrastructure that gives you great visibility around what you are using, your energy, your waste, so that you can lower that usage and understand the full picture. And so there continue to be challenges there, but we also continue to see many inroads in the new developments that are coming to market. One interesting one that bubbled up to the top is that occupiers say in their top 5 reasons for barriers is lack of support from landlords. Again, you know, dovetailing off the previous slide, we hope that we can all kind of get in unison around common goals and win-wins, and you can use vehicles like green leases to help with that negotiation. And on the flip side, though, what was really interesting is the number 1 barrier for investors is the aging building infrastructure. And we know that we are not going to build our way out of this climate emergency. We understand that the built environment has in it a lot of embodied carbon, and we want to be smart about retrofitting those buildings. And retrofitting those buildings is going to require capital, it's going to require partnership, it's going to require being planful. And I think that this is why we see that aging building infrastructure bubbles up as a top barrier for investors. We can move to the next one, please. Let's talk a little bit about value. You know, those of us who are in the real estate space are always talking about value, especially on the investor side. And I think that, you know, over the past 2-3 decades with the coming of LEED or BREEAM and these different certifications, the conversation has usually been around, what's my rent premium? What's my occupancy premium? What's going to be my cap rate? Is it going to be lower if I invest in green? And so we asked these questions in the survey. The leading investors resoundingly see the value in green. Now, since we took this survey, honestly, in the past few months, we have been feeling that that pendulum is swinging. The conversation is not so much about, will I get rent growth on a LEED platinum building? The conversation is there a brown discount if I don't invest in putting my building on a pathway to net zero? That conversation is shifting very, very quickly. And we feel that over the next 5-10 years, carbon and climate change and health are going to be these 3 big determinants of value that are going to have to infiltrate their way into the due diligence process. And that the investors that don't stay ahead of that face asset stranding and real repercussions. And so this value story, you know, if we were to conduct this survey today, I think we would ask very different questions. And that has just changed in a matter of months. Last one is about action. I know that, to the next slide. Sorry. Thank you so much. So for us, in the built environment, how we take our buildings down the pathway to net zero, how we get on this journey, it really does come down to action. It comes down to an iterative approach. It comes down to setting that North Star. And it comes down to the nuts and bolts of working with those people that are on the ground. And so we looked at, what are you doing? If you're a leader, if you're on the path, or if you're starting out, what are you doing today in the gamut of toolkits in your toolkit to get to a better outcome on a sustainability standpoint? We did see, and we organized it by, when you're buying, building, or leasing, managing and operating, or as it pertains to energy and performance. So a few things have gone mainstream. People are seeking building certification. People are looking at reducing water and waste. These other ones, like considering climate risk, developing, refurbishing, fit out with design, sustainable principles, some of these that are a little bit more obscure. What came up for us is that potentially not everyone is dabbling in these solutions, but everyone, at least those that are leading and those that are on the path, are either doing it today or plan to be doing this over the next 2 to 4 years. And so we see a massive appetite to go up the maturity curve, to dabble in all the tools that are at their disposal, maybe today or 12 months, but coming soon. The ones that were more kind of less adopted and a little bit more sophisticated were the ones that were in regards to energy and performance related, self-generating renewables, circular economy principles. Even though most are not doing it today, they also have strong appetite to adopt these actions and bring them into the fold in coming years. And so again, another positive outcome. We did a few qualitative interviews, and we interviewed many investors and occupiers, and we asked them if they were optimistic about the future. And I will say that we had a resounding optimism on behalf of both occupiers and investors on the feasibility of this, and also on the commitment to getting us to a more sustainable built environment. I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy, who will talk us through the city angle.
Cool, thank you, Laurie. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Because we asked questions about collaboration and about partnership. And a resounding response was that 8 out of 10 respondents agreed that we needed to link arms, and that there was that strong partnerships between city authorities and occupiers and investors will be absolutely instrumental in driving the net zero carbon agenda. And I think it's reflective, as we all know, the reality that no single stakeholder group within a city, whether public or private sector, has the resources or the capabilities to accomplish decarbonisation on their own. And so we can well start to see an ecosystem of partnerships emerging, comprising the various city stakeholders, from property owners through to governments and academia, that work together towards common sustainability, and that can create the right balance between regulation and penalties and taxes as against incentivization, encouragement, and advocacy, that can come together to fund more R&D to help scale the latest technology and innovations and green solutions as they become available, and that can play a key role in sharing the wisdom, in educating and disseminating know-how on net zero construction, for example, or deep energy retrofitting. And because there's clearly a very long tail of smaller real estate players that don't have the resources or knowledge on how to affect change. And if we could go to the next slide, please. The survey certainly provides a loud call out to city governments and leaders to prioritize with the real estate industry the decarbonisation of buildings in their climate action plans. Increasingly ambitious emission targets simply won't be achieved without a proactive programme to significantly reduce carbon emissions from buildings. And in many cities, buildings can typically account for as much as 60 to 70% of emissions, if we can find the next slide. And by their own estimates, in the highly service-oriented cities like London and Paris and Washington, D.C., emissions from buildings can be as much as 60, 70, 80%. And so while some cities like New York and Copenhagen and Melbourne are noticeably taking action in reducing carbon emissions, I think there is a sense that city administrations more broadly are not doing enough. And the survey identified that only about a third of respondents thought that city governments were taking strong enough action to mitigate climate, and they're looking to city governments for stronger action, particularly in the greening of local energy grids, which they have very little direct control. But I think refreshingly, administrations do seem to be recognizing that policies for the built environment do not go far enough. And we're starting to see more and more building-specific initiatives announced. And also we'll see a pivot from regulation around new building to regulation and initiatives for deep energy retrofitting. And as Laurie highlighted, the deep retrofitting of a city's existing building stock is going to be absolutely central. But the retrofitting challenge is absolutely huge. I think the pace of retrofitting is currently running at about 1 to 2% a year in mature cities, and that really needs to accelerate. And again, this is where partnerships and collaboration will be essential to identify those solutions and incentives to accelerate the depreciation of assets and encourage the faster adoption of clean energy. And so, our call out is that city governments should see the real estate industry as city shaping partners that can help achieve environmental goals which would otherwise be difficult. And if I sort of hand the baton back to Laurie to cover the final slide, it's clear that there are some common purpose and alignment between city leaders and the real estate industry that we need to collectively harness. So back to Laurie, just for the final slide.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, to bring it back, to bring it home, I'm not seeing the final slide on my computer. Jeremy, are you seeing it on your side?
Not yet.
Can we move to the next?
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. So let's think about bringing it home and thinking about the implications and recommendations that we see in this space. First of all, pursuing that full transparency, leaning in on the data and technology, and looking at the whole picture and benchmarking is critically important. To Jeremy's point, leaning into that ecosystem of partnership, sharing your wisdom, especially if you're leading in this journey, look for that whole building picture, partner with your tenants, create win-wins, engage with your city governments to co-create solutions. And of course, you can partner with nonprofits and educational institutions. We really all need to share our own genius so that we get to the best outcome for everybody. Anticipate growing demand. We understand that, just science-based targets alone, the commitments that have been made in 2021 eclipse all the previous SBTI commitments since inception. That momentum will continue to build. And those companies are going to look for net zero space. They're going to look for real estate that aligns with their ESG goals over time. Let's try to get there by embracing that retrofit challenge. When you think about your goals, having that goal for the whole real estate life cycle, thinking about new construction, embodied carbon, thinking about retrofit, thinking about when you fit out a space, how can we be conscientious for the planet and for the people? Think about how that comes and influence the due diligence, how due diligence is influenced by not only the net zero piece, but also the climate resilience piece. All of that is going to influence how we underwrite assets. And then just setting that North Star. I think that net zero can look very, very overwhelming, but I think when we look at the long term, when we look at the life of a building and how we have to bring that building along for the journey, can kind of just chip away at it in bite sizes and eventually get to the right place. And at the end, I want to just end on, if we come back full circle to that first slide where we said today we're talking about eco-healing, that one piece of the whole responsible real estate pie. There is so much more to that pie. There's the entire social angle, the health and wellness angle, the inclusive angle. And so looking at our buildings as, really asking our buildings what the responsibility of the built environment is to not just the planet, but to people, and bringing that social lens to the conversation as well. And JLL is committed to cracking that conversation open over the next 12 months and exploring that. But we feel that the built environment has a big role to play to create social justice and environmental justice and all of that for the world. So I'm going to end it there and pass it back to you, Cynthia.
Great. Thank you so much, both Lori and Jeremy. That was tremendous. There's a great deal of depth, I think you all could see in this research. And I would invite you all, you can scan the QR code, and I would invite you actually to take the survey, the Responsible Real Estate Survey, and get your own custom report card. See what your maturity level is and how you stack up to the industry and how you compare to industry leaders. So again, scan the QR code and take the survey, and within probably 3 to 5 days, you'll get a custom report. So thank you again. So now I'd like to turn it to Ibrahim. If we can take this slide down. And Ibrahim, there was, again, an awful lot there, very rich data, and you bring such tremendous experience from your side. What were some of your key takeaways?
First of all, congratulations, Lori and Jeremy. The first one, and I hope I speak on behalf of everyone here, this study proves what we talk behind closed door or the boardrooms, that we are on the right track, that built environment can and will be a low-hanging fruit for any net zero commitment, and proves that there are changes, and especially now the timing. And what I like about this is the timing post-COVID-19. When we talk about the business readjusting itself, we have to be agile, we have to be resilient, and with the natural related disasters, which impacts, at least we just had a flood in a big cyclone in Oman a couple of months ago, and the first thing were impacted, by the way, all the houses and all the real estate. People were talking about their houses, not their cars or lives, because the government could save the lives, but they could not save the houses. So I think it's a timely survey. The highlight for me is what the awareness campaigns we've been doing either for investors and occupiers. All the business or related organizations, be it a GBC or JLL or WBCSD, it's paying back. We cannot claim anymore, or investors, that people don't know what's the right thing, by the way. People at least know what's the true north. And I really wish that this study, by the way, will be communicated properly for the non-business related in the built environment, because this is what we need. We need this to go to investors. We need to get this to compliance officers, to insurance companies, to real estate owners and investors as banks. From my perspective, in our region, by the way, we look at almost 90% of our businesses in the global south, and mainly in real estate, by the way. And we started recently, in the last year and a half, I started doing with the Chief Compliance Officer climate risk analysis, and for both occupiers and for us as an owner. And to be honest with you, what I see, at least from our region, that this will be a baseline. At least we go back with a snowball effect in our region, where three oil-producing countries committed to net zero and announced how they want to do and the investments. I think this study will help me to share with my ministers in our region that the first low-hanging fruit to decarbonize, straightforward, where you can go for built environment. This is when you were guys presenting, this is the first thing came to my mind. The second thing is, we also, in the globals, we have the region, the oil-producing countries, and countries like Egypt, like CIS, like Pakistan, Jordan, Lebanon. These countries now, they have their governments are looking for the life post-COVID-19 when it comes to businesses and how they can reintroduce the business formula there. And they're working with finance institutions such as the Asian Development Bank, EBRD, other banks. So again, if they want access to capital, definitely one of my recommendations for them is to refer to this study as we speak. So well done and congratulations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ibrahim. The other takeaway, and Lori, I think you mentioned this, and we've seen, Guy mentioned it as well, is it's all about action. And what are the things, we're done with targets, right? Well, some of us are, but we're now at the point of taking action. And Ibrahim, your company, MAF, has some very ambitious targets. Could you outline some of the actions that you all have been taking over the last few years? You've been a leader in this space. Could you discuss some of that?
Let me tell you a story. It maybe can relate to my first answer. In 2016, I went to the board and we did some study, of course, different stakeholders, and JLL helped us with this study. That we do have a negative environmental impact as a company, and we're a privately owned, and I shared this negative environmental impact mainly in carbon and water with a shareholder who did not want to leave with a negative environmental legacy. And he thought greening it or getting green building certification is a good start, but it's not enough, by the way. And I threw net positive after discussions with external partners and internally. And the chairman of our board, Sir Michael, said, can we achieve it? And that time I said, I have no idea. But regardless, if we achieve it or not, it will be great to aim for the stars. And it's 2040. We have a net positive commitment in carbon and water by 2040. And net positive means we have to give to the environment more than we take. And why carbon and water? Again, we're in the real estate, and Lori and Jeremy mentioned that clearly our negative environmental impact, especially not only carbon, water, where I come from a region that there is absolutely no water. I was in Jordan 2-3 weeks ago. I was visiting dams, there are no water in the dams, and it's another risk as well. So we're adding this to risk the access to water. And since then, become a journey. And now, 2021, as part of our not only net zero being 2030, we have a whole plan in a couple of years for the built environment in the real estate, and we're between real estate and retail and leisure entertainment, how we can do climate change mitigation, adaptation, and even offsetting. And offsetting, I mean by investing in offsite generations. And this is what, in 5 years, which led again back, I wanted to talk about the finance. In the last 2 years, because of such commitment and because of knowing the how, we did transactions of sustainable finance of $2.7 billion the last 2 years. 600 million, $1.2 billion in sustainable in green sukuk, and 1.5 billion in sustainability linked loan. So we got access to capital. We are on track. We have more than 3 million square meters green certified space, and we being sustainable real estate and responsible real estate give us access to cash from investors and financial institutions. So I'm very proud of this achievement. And because when we talk about Middle East or even the global South, whatever the global North ambition is our starting point. And this is something I think you talked about, Lori, about sharing wisdom. We are just, in December, we're gonna celebrate the Golden Jubilee of the United Arab Emirates. We're 50 years old nation. What's 50 years on history? It's, 100 years. So we have the opportunity to do things right. And doing things right is to start where you guys finished in the UK or in America. But the trick is we need to share the information and mainly the technological innovation that we can use. You talked about data and technology. The technology is there. We just need to have access to it to implement it. And this is actually, I think, the Expo 2020 project is a great example how you can do things properly when it comes even to real estate, sustainable real estate projects.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's great. And I would just invite, if anyone in the room has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll pass the mic. Yeah.
Yes, Régis Meyer from the Ministry of Ecological Transition, and we are acting as a co-chair of the Global IBC with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And I would ask a question. You have seen that we highlight decarbonization, and there is an item resilience. So I would like to understand what is the priority, maybe in the mind of an investor or occupier. Is it the risk of adaptation or resilience, or the risk or the pathway for through decarbonization?
Thank you. So the question, Richard, would you like to, so we're actually joined here.
We're all in the room. I can't hear it. Everybody acts online. Could you just, yes, simplify the question. Yes.
The priority is more sensibility or attention, more risk, risk connected.
I understand.
Or is it the risk cost of decarbonization?
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask the guys who did the survey first if
yes,
if you've got an answer for it.
Yes.
Go on, Laurie.
Yes. So the question was, how are investors prioritizing whether they're looking at the net zero journey or resilience? That's how I heard the question. And I would say that in speaking to our stakeholders, they're really looking at them side by side and understanding them in parallel. You know, they have their current book of business, and then they have what they're going to be buying in the future. And so timelines are impacting priorities, but I feel that the complexity and the criticality of both those topics are top of mind across the board.
Great. Thanks, Laurie. Can I just add, and I've heard it so often, I do think it's really, really important to collaborate because none of us are going to do this on our own. And I think collaboration between owners and occupiers is absolutely crucial, because we've all got the same sort of goals, but probably different pathways to get there. And I heard an interesting description of this last week of radical collaboration, where we actually grab it. And I do think that is important for us all going forward, because you might own the building, but you can't actually necessarily determine how it's being used. And we do need to work together. So that, if I'm going to chip into that discussion, because you've got a short-term and a longer-term goal, and you somehow need to get the short-term measures in place in order to achieve the longer term. And it might mean upfront investment, but in the longer term, you're future-proofing that portfolio.
It's a very good question, by the way. It's a very important point, and I want to second what Laurie mentioned. From our side, for example, and we deal with both. We're an investor, we're an occupier, and we have occupiers as well, because we have 4 different companies, and I work with the 4 different companies. So sometimes I have the landlord hat, the investor hat, and sometimes I look at myself as the occupier hat. Depends on but vertical. And you know why we do it this way? Because it depends on A, the geographic location, B, access to capital. The third one, mainly from a pure risk analysis. Like in the UAE, we started looking at scope 1 and 2 and 3 and embodied carbon, because it was raised by our chief compliance officer. He did ask the question in the UAE, and I said, well, okay, if you're talking about the UAE, that I can take, but for Egypt, for example, I am working on it, but adaptation and mitigation is a priority for me, because certain circumstances. But as Laurie mentioned, we have it as verticals from a sustainability perspective. At least we look at it and we ensure that they are going side by side. Eventually, our target is to achieve mitigation, resilience, and adaptation at the same time, which is 2040. But we put the net zero 2030, and we put the mitigation as the low-hanging fruit to achieve that, as you may know. But for investors, from pure compliance, we look at it as the same vertical side by side, at least in our case.
Another question?
Because for me, net zero pathway is well understood, I think. Adaptation to what? It's a choice to which level of risk you want to adapt to, what scenario you think is. So there is more evaluation, and it's not so clear to how far you want to go in an adaptation, because after 2050, we know that the scenario can diverge according to the policy we implement. So do you have a you want to be very, very solid against risk, for instance, for overheating, for instance, in cities? Or do you say, okay, let's do a short few steps, but we know that few steps sometimes doesn't go to the final result. So it's like to have a wall, and it doesn't have sense. So.
Just to chip in there, I think you've got to do both. You need both. You're, I think, referring to your scenario analysis, assessing risk, TCFD type of approach, I assume. That is absolutely crucial for all of us to do in our own operations, and especially by scenario. And there is a need for adaptation. And I actually think we need to be looking to see where those scenarios are going to end up, because I think the optimum scenario here at COP at the moment, it seems to be bobbing about the place. It seems to be more optimistic than when I first came here earlier on in the week. So I just think you need to do both, and adaptation is definitely part of what we have to do.
Oh, okay. We've got another question in the room.
Thanks. I'm Claire Bonham-Carter with AECOM. I'm a can't speak anymore. Director of Sustainable Development, and I primarily work with cities as my clients. So I love the fact that this survey looked at collaboration, and you're saying, maybe this is a question for you, you're the man that said collaboration was important, that's a key piece of it. Also interested to see that you were talking about mandates and incentives as being part of that. I see the mandate as being the piece that can really transform markets, because then it's a level playing field. Developers have to do the same thing. From a sort of city consultant side of things, we often get investors, landlords, basically protesting that they don't want these mandates being put in place. And so my question is, how much, as part of this survey, perhaps you actually talked to the investment community, the developer community, about their willingness to support stronger climate action coming from the city side to really help that market transformation happen?
Jeremy, could you take that?
Yes, I certainly could. It's an interesting debate, isn't it, about the issue of mandatory regulations versus sort of voluntary partnerships. And I just think that there's a role for both. We've spoken to a number of city authorities, and they have been very frustrated at the lack of progress, and therefore a lobbying for increased regulation to enforce compliance. But likewise, you can also see examples around the world where there has been voluntary collaboration, and the real estate industry has been at the top table in helping to set those regulations so that they're ambitious but also achievable. I can think of Copenhagen and San Francisco are examples of that. And those voluntary programs can actually help to create sort of multi-staker buy-in. So it's mandatory regulations will be a reality and will be coming thick and fast. And we're already starting to see that. But I think there's a strong call out for ensuring that that all different stakeholders are at the top table in trying to set those regulations so that they are ambitious and realistic.
Yeah, it's a great question, by the way, and I think it's time for us to look at cities as a whole if we want to achieve as even real estate any targets. And this is something we're debating even in our region, by the way. In our case, and we always had mandatory policies in our company, and we were the base for the region. So regardless what is the green building certificate, green building certification, anything we build must be LEED Gold or equivalent. We have mixed use communities, BREEAM excellent. We have even net zero buildings within, and we could prove that this is mainly for the customers want that, by the way. They assure that being sustainable is good quality, by the way, regardless they like the environment or not. But when they see it certificate, said, okay, I'm happy to pay that extra if there is any extra, but I would like to buy sustainable because it's good quality. But I think it's time now to stop and look at whose responsible it is. And I like the responsible real estate mandate. If we have responsible real estate mandate, and you talked about collaboration, and the government, like I'll take Singapore, by the way, as an example, the master plan of Singapore that they've been there for years, and the government hand over master plans for cities should be like a holy red line. People, political parties or different governments shouldn't change, because we're talking about environment, we're talking about the wellness and connectivity of people. And this is how we should look at it. So I think it's beyond the real estate or investors. It's and even mandates or not. It's time to look at cities in a different way. And maybe our job here in such surveys or practitioners is to highlight this to the people as well, that we need to start doing. I have the right of a green space. I do have that right. I have the right to walk to my school. I have the right to, so this is where we need to start thinking and then push for mandates. If we want mandates for green, or I think we have it or we will have it, but I think the thinking of cities should change. And this is where the mandates will come by default, because sometimes you'll have the mandate, it's not necessarily the mandate you'd like to have. Right, so there is the awareness. So it's a sword with two sides. I would be careful there.
Do you want to respond? You're okay. Okay.
And actually, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap things, because what that brings in, Ibrahim, is exactly kind of what we were talking about as well: the social aspect, the health aspect, and the fact that buildings we need them to be, they are dynamic. And they can be a line of defense in terms of health, and they can promote health and well-being and positive social outcomes. So thank you for bringing that up. And this has been a tremendous, yeah, no, let's one more question. Okay.
Look at the Giovanetti WBCSD. I mean, I wanted to emphasize indeed the importance of the radical collaboration. I think, this is kind of something that's mentioned again, and more, luckily, this is becoming more important. I think at this COP now, through the Global ABC, but all the partners in the Building to COP coalition, I think we managed this time, first of all, to have a built environment day at the COP. Since Paris, I think we haven't had such an important day. And it's finally recognized. And as the head, at the start of the day, it will be about deep and radical collaboration. Same, two different terminology for the same purpose. And the radical collaboration is really a kind of really across the entire value chain. Like you spoke about the investor, property developer, but it also comes really from the material, construction, real estate, user, financial institution, insurance. So this is really the importance of keeping the system, because that's where the 40% of global emission come from. So when we speak about, you know, reducing the emissions, so we're speaking about 40%, and this is an important common language that we have. And that's where then we have to make sure that everybody that is responsible for this emission is involved, and everybody that has the power to influence that is brought up. So, and that's where I think the importance of investor, developers, so architects, they don't have direct emission themselves. You know, their scope 1 emission is probably not existing, but the power of influencing if and how buildings are constructed, that's very strong. So this is really the importance to make sure that they are strongly empowered and responsibilized of how much they can be part of the solution. So, and I think this survey is actually, you know, showing how they feel that they have a power to influence. So thanks for these numbers. It's always important to have numbers to show how it's important. So thanks.
Awesome. And if we could actually put up the slide again with the QR code to take the survey, I want to ensure that folks have that QR code that they can scan, which is, yes, you just had it up there. Perfect. Right. So again, I would invite you to scan this QR code, take the survey, and, you know, within a week or so, have a customized report. You can see where you stack up. You know, I think as part of the whole collaboration in cities and incentives, et cetera, you know, in the developed world, 80 to 85% of the current building stock will be in existence in 2050. So Jeremy mentioned, you know, retrofitting right now is only 1 or 2% annually. That has to dramatically increase. We shouldn't be building new buildings. We should be retrofitting. And what are the materials that we need for that? How do we make that more of a circular retrofit? What are the incentives that would enable the level of retrofitting versus tearing down and building? And so that's another whole, we could go on for another hour, but thank you. I want to thank very much Ibrahim for your tremendous insight. For everybody in the room, Lori and Jeremy, great job. And thank you for bringing to life the excellent work that you both have led. And yeah, we'll look forward to a cleaner built sector going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.